intervals. What is an interval, right? What is an interval, and what's the difference between a major chord and a major third, or a major seventh, or a major seventh interval and a major seventh chord? All these mean very different things, and that's what frustrates me the most. So let's talk about it, okay? So intervals. What we've already talked a little bit about is like this hand position, C, E, and G. This is the most common way that people play chords in general. Especially as a beginner, you'll notice this, right? Left hand a lot of time gets the chords in, right? You're playing some kind of melody. So what is going on here when we are talking about a major chord is that it's broken up into intervals. C to E is a major third, and C to G is a perfect fifth. But when you say a major chord, that's what saying major chord is kind of shorthand for. It already explains exactly what notes are going to be in this chord. And it implies those intervals. So if I say a C minor chord, then that implies this. C with a minor third and a perfect fifth, okay? So already that's confusing because a minor chord is different from a minor third. So let's explain what intervals are then, right? Because if intervals are how we identify chords, that means it's really, really important, okay? So let's do that. In order to kind of have an interval, right, and talk about an interval, you need more than one note. Unless it's a unison, right? I guess that's the first interval. If you have two instruments, right, on the piano, we only have one of each note, right? But other instruments do not. Other instruments, like the guitar, for example, you can play two of this note. There are two ways to play this note. There are more ways to play this note. So if you were to play two of these C's at the same time, that's called a unison, which is pretty straightforward. But now it's going to start getting a little bit less straightforward. So minor means in intervals, generally, a half step shorter in distance. So if I say that we have C to D, the distance between those two notes, that's going to be an interval. We're talking about an interval because it's the distance between one note to the other. And that is 2 half steps away. So if we're going 2 half steps away from C to D, that's called a major second, okay? So if this is the interval that we're talking about, this is the shortest distance we can get on the piano. That's called a minor second, okay? So it's pretty straightforward if you get the idea that a major second and minor second, they kind of come in pairs when we're looking at this, and one is a half step shorter than the other. Let's go through the different lengths of the intervals. So C to C sharp or D flat, that is a minor second. C to D is a major second. C to E flat is a minor third. C to E is a major third. C to F is where we're already throwing a wrench in the mix again already. So C to F is called a perfect fourth. And that's perfect. It's a perfect interval because we don't call it major or minor, okay? So if we go a half step above, that's called a tritone. If we go a half step below, that's called a major third, right? So notice we're not calling it any modification to the fourth. That's why it's a perfect interval, okay? So C to F, perfect fourth. C to F sharp or G flat is going to be called the tritone, Tritone. And then C to G is a perfect fifth, another perfect interval, okay? So no, we're not expecting major or minor versions of F or G when we're talking about intervals, this distance apart from C. So now we have the perfect fifth. We go up a half step, And we've got a minor sixth. So now we're back to major minor intervals again. So minor sixth, major sixth, minor seventh, major seventh, and then an octave. That's also a perfect interval. Okay. So no major minor octaves, right? It's just octaves. So let's go through that real quick one more time, just to refresh. C to C sharp, minor second. C to D, major second. Minor third, major third, perfect fourth, tritone, perfect fifth, minor sixth, major sixth, minor seventh, major seventh, and a perfect octave. Okay. This is really important for us to understand because it allows us, just like when I said a C major chord, it allows us to know what that C major chord is built of. We have a major third, C to E. And if we're referencing still from C, C to G is a perfect fifth, right? So you could also think of it as another way, right? Which is why, again, this is so confusing, why it's frustrating. C to E is a major third. E to G is a minor third. So if E is our starting point for our reference for intervals, E to G is a minor third because 1, 2, 3 half steps away. Just like we were doing when C to E flat is a minor third. 1, 2, 3 half steps away, right? So all of them are going to be the same number of half steps, the same distance apart for each type of interval. I hope already that that's making some sense, but this is why it's important. Once we start getting into fancier chords, for example, this is a major seventh chord. We call this a major seventh chord. And remember when I said that we have a minor seventh and major seventh interval, that's where this chord gets its name from. You have a major chord, right? C to E, which is a major third, C to G, which is a perfect fifth, C to B, which is a major seventh. And that's why we call this a major seventh chord, because we added the major seven as the interval. Okay. Now we call this a dominant seventh chord, not a minor seventh chord, dominant seventh chord, because our C major chord is still a major chord, right? So it would be confusing if we called this a minor seventh chord. That wouldn't really make sense because our main foundational chord that we're adding on to is a major chord, right? So the dominant seventh chord adds a minor seventh interval onto the chord. And again, if this is confusing, tell me about it. It's very frustrating, but this is stuck throughout, hundreds of years in music theory, and that's why we're still on it. Okay. So the next type of chord we could do now is a minor seventh, a true minor seventh chord. The minor chord, right? So C, E flat, G, that's our C minor chord. And we added a minor seventh onto that. Okay. One more type of chord is our diminished chord. And this is how you build a diminished chord. This is the foundation for our diminished seventh chord, right? So think of this as another type of chord like major, minor, and diminished. If we add our seventh to this is one type of diminished chord. It's called a half diminished chord. This is called a fully diminished chord. At this point, if you're even using these, coming across these, right? This is how you would build these chords to know what notes belong to the chord names. But at this point, if you've already gotten this far, you just got to memorize how these work. So the easiest way I think to memorize it is just to go from the most widely spread out position in the chords. We go major seventh chord, dominant seventh chord, Then we go minor seventh chord. We just moved that third to a minor third. That's the difference between dominant seventh and minor seventh. And then we go to diminished seventh types. Half diminished, fully diminished, okay? And this gives you a point of reference to build for any type of chord. If you know what intervals make up each chord, you know how to build that chord from any starting note. Okay, so C, E, and G, major chord. That's got a major third interval and a perfect fifth on top. Now if we start from another note, let's say something trickier that you wouldn't think off the top of your head from a black key. So 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps away. That's a major third and a perfect fifth on top of that. So that actually ends up, a perfect fifth is always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 half steps away. So that makes this E flat major or D sharp major, okay? So I hope this clarifies a little bit on how the terminology works. If it's confusing, go over it a few times. It's very, very helpful to have this in the back of your brain as helpful knowledge for you moving forwards, especially if you like the sound of jazz. Jazz is all built up off of seventh chords, and since there are more notes in all the seventh chords, it's harder because you need to know all your seventh chords, okay? So I hope this helps. Hopefully it's not too crazy. Anyways, I will see you next time. Bye.